Hello, everyone joining us, and welcome to Ballotpedia's Down the Ballot, What You May Not Know from the 2022 Midterm Election Webinar. Today, we have with us Ballotpedia's Editor-in-Chief, Geoff Pallay, and Managing Editor for Marquee Elections, Cory Eucalitto, to discuss the outcomes we've seen since last week, including trifectas, state legislative elections, state Supreme Courts, and down the ballot results. We're very excited to see what they have to share with us. Over to you, Geoff.
All right, thanks, Lauren. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Hard to believe, 1 week till Thanksgiving. We just got our turkey today, so hope you guys are all ready. So Cory, we're all caught up and we've been crunching a lot of the numbers, and like Lauren said, we're going to talk through 5 key areas today. Otherwise, we would be here forever. Trifectas, state legislative elections, state financial officers, state Supreme Courts, and a little dose of mayors. So let's go ahead and get started, and we'll start with trifectas. So Cory, tell us all about what happened with trifectas last week.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar, trifectas is described single-party government when one party holds the governorship and majorities of both chambers of the legislature. So we have results for all states except Alaska and New Hampshire. Alaska is still going through ranked choice voting, and they've had a lot of minority coalitions ruling in the past, so it's always kind of a tricky trifecta situation. And there are a bunch of recounts happening in the New Hampshire House, which is also very close. So we don't really know what's happening there yet. But what we do know right now is that Democrats gained 3 trifectas and will have at least 17. Republicans lost 1, will have at least 21. And then 10 other states will have a divided government. So I think this graphic, shows us all of the changes this year. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's really amazing. Since,
yeah, I guess
40.
I was just clarifying for myself. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Cory.
Just clarifying myself. They gained Democrats gained a net of 3 trifectas. Republicans lost a net of 1. So you can see that they won 4 new ones in Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, and Minnesota. That's why I was confusing myself there. But yeah, go ahead, Geoff.
It's a confusing subject, especially when it's amazing that New Hampshire is going to be so close with 400 state House seats. So the 40 trifectas will be the most trifectas that we've seen at any point in time since we've been covering trifectas. It's a really interesting development because for years you had a number of different states with split party government, either between governorship or state legislatures, or even within state houses. And it kind of speaks a little bit to what we saw this election cycle was a lot of incumbents holding serve. If you listen to our ballot measures webinar last week, this is something that Ryan and I talked a lot about. And a lot of states really just showing, okay, if you're one party, you're pretty firmly in that camp, or you went to the other side. So how do you think that manifested, Cory, from what you've seen with trifectas?
I mean, just far fewer divided governments. So like I said, there are going to be 10 divided governments. In 1992 and 1997, there were 31 states with divided governments, which is just a
lot different map. It's complete flip. Yeah. It's a complete flip.
Total complete reversing.
Yeah, wow. So this is a map of what it's going to look like as a result of the 2022 elections. You can see everything in red. We have our trifectas for Republicans. Everything in blue are the Democratic trifectas. There's just not a lot of gray anymore. Almost all Americans these days, a vast majority of Americans live under some form of single party government. So let's dig a little more into state legislatures then. So state legislatures are essentially 2/3 of what makes up a trifecta. There are 99 chambers nationwide, because Nebraska, our wonderful friends there, have single chamber party government, 1 state Senate, which is why we have 99. So Cory, tell us about state legislatures.
Yeah, so 4 chambers are uncalled, 2 chambers in Alaska, Pennsylvania House, and then the New Hampshire House, like I mentioned before. So we don't really know what's happened there yet, but everything else, Democrats gained a net of 3 trifectas, Republicans lost a net of 3 trifectas. The 3 chambers that changed control also all contributed to those trifecta changes. So Democrats picked up the Michigan Senate, the Michigan House, so they'll have a full trifecta in Michigan, as well as the Minnesota Senate, which means a trifecta in Minnesota. This will be the first time that Democrats control the Michigan Senate since 1984. the first time they've controlled the Michigan House since 2008, and the first time they've controlled the Minnesota Senate since 2012. So the Michigan Senate flip since 1984 is that was in place for a long time. The Democratic pickup of the Minnesota Senate too also leaves us, similar to the divided government question. If you're just looking at legislatures, now Virginia will be the only state in the country where Republicans control one chamber and Democrats control the other chamber. Take the unicameral New Hampshire or a Nebraska legislature out of that. But so yeah, similarly to a record low number of divided states, there's now just one state with a split in the legislature itself.
Yeah, and looking ahead to 2023, both Virginia State Senate and State House are up for election. So if we were odds makers, we'd probably say one party or the other will probably grab both chambers. And if that happens, I've got to imagine that would be the first time ever where you'd have no state legislatures with any split party control. So again, this is what the map looks like post-election. And let's take a look now at veto-proof majorities. And why are veto-proof majorities so interesting, Cory?
Yeah, so with sufficient support from the legislature, it ranges between 1/2 and 2/3 of legislators, depending on the state. Legislatures can overturn gubernatorial vetoes. So when you have a situation where you have let's say a Democratic governor and then a veto-proof majority of Republican legislators, there can just be a lot of conflict there. The legislature can overturn any veto from the governor and gives the legislature a tremendous amount of power. So it's really the situations where we're looking for opposing parties, one with a veto-proof majority and one in the governor's office, that you get a lot of conflict, but there can obviously be internal conflicts if they're of the same party. So as a result of the elections, Vermont became one of the states now with a supermajority of one party and a governor of the opposite party. Democrats won veto-proof majorities in both chambers of the legislature, and Governor Phil Scott, a Republican, won re-election. 2 states came close to this situation. Republicans gained a supermajority in the state Senate in North Carolina. They don't have one in the state House, but the governor there, Roy Cooper, is a Democrat. And in Wisconsin, Governor Tony Evers, the Democrat, won re-election. Republicans picked up a supermajority in the state Senate, but they won't have one in the state House. Heading into these elections, there were 4 states with a veto-proof majority of one party and a governor of the opposite: Kentucky, Kansas, Maryland, and Massachusetts. Well, we can just run through what happened in each of those. Kentucky will stay that way: Democratic governor, veto-proof Republican supermajority. Kansas, same thing. Laura Kelly, the Democrat, won re-election. Republicans have a veto-proof majority in the legislature. Maryland and Massachusetts, now you're going to have veto-proof majorities and governors of the same party. Democrats had legislative supermajorities in both of those states, and they just picked up the governor's office in both of those as well. So yeah, quite a few changes going on there, and it should be interesting to, if you're looking for legislatures with interesting conflicts in the next couple of years, those will be some of them.
Yeah, and there's quite a few veto-proof majorities nationally, like states like South Carolina or North Dakota. But again, to your point, most of those are veto-proof majorities in states where they're aligned with the governor. So for the most part, you wouldn't expect to see too many actual conflicts taking place. Although, not that doesn't ever happen, but these are the states where you really see it play out, or when different parties are sort of controlling each lever of government. So, if you've been following along with the news in the last week or so, it's been a pretty conventional observation that the election didn't go as was necessarily predicted or as expected. There was talk beforehand of a red wave or not. Democrats kept control of the U.S. Senate. Republicans, as of yesterday, did take control of the U.S. House, although with fewer seats than they had expected on their part, or as many seats as maybe pundits had predicted. Democrats flipped 3 chambers. But something interesting that we found when we dug into the data with state legislatures was what happened with respect to incumbents. So we've been looking specifically at how do incumbents perform, and we follow that ever since 2010. And the numbers were pretty interesting. So I'm going to flip that slide, Cory, and let you kind of walk us through it. And and what happened with state legislative incumbents across the country.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned before lots of incumbents being reelected, and that's kind of played out here. So this chart shows the number of incumbents who have lost in state legislative general elections. And you'll see so this is 93% of all elections called. We're at 121 state legislative incumbents losing, 73 Democrats, 45 Republicans, and 3 others. So that's 2.6% of all incumbents running for reelection. And the chart just tells the story there. Obviously, there's not the exact same number of seats up every year, but the percentage is still quite low. There are, let's see how many, 343 races uncalled that feature incumbents. So there will be more, but I don't think there's going to be a giant change in those 343 races.
Yeah, so I mean, the numbers hold. This would be the lowest number of incumbents defeated in a state legislative election cycle this decade, which is quite a surprising number, especially considering all of the polling numbers showing that Americans were pretty upset heading into the election. It's kind of that sort of standard old saying that people don't like their elected officials except for their own. So the incumbents won at a really a higher rate than usual. And in particular, I thought was really interesting is more Democratic incumbents lost than Republican incumbents, which sort of flies counter to the chambers being flipped. What kind of happened there when you looked into the numbers a little more closely?
And I'm just going back to dig up the exact number, because there were actually a pretty high percentage of incumbents defeated in primaries this year. Actually, the highest since 2010. So you have the highest percentage of incumbents losing in primaries this year, which was 4.7%, and then the lowest in general elections. So I guess it's nobody likes politicians or elected officials except their own, unless they're in primaries in 2022.
Yeah, I think what we really saw in a lot of respects is, in Republican-held states, a number of Democratic incumbents lost, in states like Florida, which gives more sort of larger majorities, or in Massachusetts, if you have larger majorities for Democrats. But then it's those swing seats that flip chambers in favor of Democrats in Michigan and Minnesota, for instance. So, very interesting elections going on in state legislatures. So, and you can see here from this map, Cory, I'll let you kind of walk us through it in a second, but I'll kind of cue it up for you that this map was just showing the breakdown of the number of incumbents by state who lost. So you can see which states here had more incumbents win re-election more easily. Texas was the most interesting one, I think, because I believe if I'm remembering our reporting right, it's the first year that no incumbents were defeated in general election in quite a long time, I think. So what are we seeing here on this map, Cory?
Yeah, the highest. So let's see, the green to the darkish green are the higher percentages of incumbents losing. The two highest, the only states above 10% red states, West Virginia and North Dakota, where it was 10.3 and 10.4% of incumbents losing. So that's pretty high. And yeah, I guess the trend is kind of reddish Republican controlled legislatures are where the incumbent defeat numbers are higher. And that's where you saw, more Democrats losing.
Okay, well, let's move on then to a different area entirely of state government, so state financial officers. So this is an area of state officials that we've covered here at Ballotpedia for almost a decade now, but it's not one that has typically gotten as much attention in prior years. So state financial officers specifically are the offices of treasurer, auditor, and controller. And a number of these are elected. Some of these are appointed, but tell us a little bit, Cory, about what happened in these elections the other night.
Yeah, so it's a little trickier to piece together because of how these folks assume office. So of the 68 offices that could be affected by these elections, 50 of them were directly elected. And then the other 18, so 9 of those are either appointed by the legislature or the governor who won office in 2022, or they serve at the pleasure of the elected officials up for office. So we know exactly what happened in the directly elected ones, but if we're looking at who's going to control the appointing body, basically responsible for appointing the treasurer, auditor, controller in the states where they weren't directly elected. Excuse me. So across the board, Republicans gained 5 offices currently controlled by Democrats, defeating 2 incumbents in the process. Democrats, though, gained full appointment authority over 2 offices, Massachusetts and Minnesota. So as a result of the elections, there are going to be 37 Democrats, 57 Republicans. This is across the whole country. So 37 Democrats, down from 42, 57 Republicans, up from 56. 5 state financial officers who are going to be appointed by a combination of Democrats and Republicans. So we're not really sure what partisanship label to give them. And then 6 positions that haven't been decided. So a little bit of a swing towards Republicans in those offices. And they're becoming, I think we've been covering them for a long time. This is the first year we're really diving into this level of analysis as they become more prominent positions as people talk about how states invest pension funds and things like that. So yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, they've been really fascinating offices to cover because really they're, both parties are using the offices, using the positions in different ways. And you never know what layer of government will have more intrigue. So yeah, state financial officers. Well, thanks for running through that, Cory. Let's move to another branch, state Supreme Courts. Another one that we've been covering for quite a while now. And we had a lot of fun a couple of years ago, Cory, actually doing a whole big long report that I'm going to put you on the spot about that wasn't in our presentation, but I think really helped set this up. And it's that we looked specifically at partisanship of state Supreme Courts, and we did something what we call the dissenters report. So maybe take a couple minutes and tell our listeners all about what were those 2 reports you did, and then how does that play into what happened with the state Supreme Courts this year and our understanding of that landscape.
Yeah, the partisanship report is what enables a lot of something like this map, for example. Many states elect state Supreme Court justices in partisan elections, but plenty of them are selected in other ways. So they're elected in nonpartisan elections. Some states have partisan primaries and nonpartisan general elections, but lots of justices are also appointed by governors. They need confirmation from the legislature, or there's a sort of a nonpartisan judicial nominating commission involved. So it's really easy to create a map like this when you're just looking at the people who are elected in partisan elections. But there's a lot of big blank spaces when you're looking at the others. So in 2021, I think, we did a deep dive into all of the justices that were on the court at that time to evaluate the partisanship of the justices who were appointed in other ways. So somebody might have been appointed by a nonpartisan judicial nominating commission, but they had run for office as a Republican in the past. So we were doing that kind of research to apply a score kind of assessing their affiliation with one of the 2 political parties before they got on the court. So that's how we get a kind of a national picture of the partisan makeup across the country. The second part of that report, we called it determiners and dissenters. It's a little less relevant to these elections, but we were looking at what are like the governing majorities on those courts. So what's the percentage at which state Supreme Courts rule unanimously? What's the percentage at which they're ruling, divided by 1 seat, maybe 5-4? And then who are the justices forming those majorities? So are there 5 justices consistently ruling together and 4 ruling the other way? Are there people from different political parties who always write a dissent together? So looking for those kinds of interesting trends.
But yeah, state Supreme Court opinions are not always the same kind of simplistic understanding as a roll call vote on a bill in a legislature that, okay, here's the D's and the R's voted an issue. But you can kind of get the same kind of read and feel for, like you said, the coalitions and the blocks on the various courts.
Yeah.
So yeah, we quite a large number of state Supreme Court seats were up this year. Tell us a little about what happened.
Yeah, so Republicans gained 3 seats. Democrats picked up 1 seat, but the big change is in the North Carolina Supreme Court. It's the only court where the partisan balance changed from Democrat control to Republican control. And I think if I'm right, it went from 5-2, maybe 6-1 Democrat as recently as 2020, and now it's
Yeah, just a few
5-2
years ago.
Republican. So there's been 2 election cycles of Republicans gaining seats in North Carolina, and so they've dramatically flipped control in just 2 election cycles. So yeah, that was the only court that that changed party hands. 2 incumbents lost, Michael Burke in Illinois and Sam Ervin in North Carolina, one of those seats. And as a result of this, Republicans will hold majorities on 27 courts, Democrats on 16, and then 9 courts will either be split or a little unclear because of how folks were appointed. That adds up to 52 because Texas and Oklahoma both have 2 courts of last resort that deal separately with criminal and civil questions, basically.
Everything is bigger in Texas, including the number of state Supreme Court justices they have there, right? So, great. Well, let's say Supreme Courts. Thanks, Cory. Let's move on to our last topic then, which is mayoral elections. So Ballotpedia covers the 100 largest mayors by population, as well as all of the state capitals. And there are quite a few mayoral elections taking place throughout the course of this whole calendar year, but in particular also last week. So some of the mayoral races are still uncalled, but what do we know so far, Cory?
Yeah, so just this is a fun topic too. I mean, we have to kind of do the same thing that we do with state Supreme Court justices to figure out partisanship here, because a lot of these are elected in nonpartisan races. So we do the research to look at their previous political affiliation, direct communication from the office holder, previous candidacies for offices to figure out what is going on in partisanship here. So heading into the election, or heading into this year, if you look at the 100 largest cities in the country, 62 were led by Democrats, 26 by Republicans, 4 independents, and then 7 nonpartisan. Yeah, that's right. And if you look at this, these are the 100 largest cities that were up for election this year. There's, it doesn't look like any flips. No, there are some flips so far. Where are my notes? Yeah, Democrats picked up a third from Republicans in North Las Vegas. Is that on there? No, I put that slide in there. Oh, well. Republicans lost 1 to Democrats. Nonpartisan mayors were reelected in Corpus Christi and Reno. And then we've got the Democrat-held mayorship in Austin going to a runoff, and the independent-held mayorship of Laredo advancing to a runoff. So still a lot kind of undetermined here. Oh, there's North Las Vegas. On the slide, I mean.
Yeah, were any particular interesting mayoral elections that you were paying attention to over the last couple of weeks?
Los Angeles was the closest that we were following, second largest city in the country. Karen Bass was a former, I guess she still is, a member of Congress, and she was running against Rick Caruso, who wasn't running as a Republican, was sometimes identified as one, and I don't remember the exact vote totals, but it was fairly competitive for a Los Angeles mayoral election. But ultimately, Karen Bass, who was probably expected to win, won there.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, we're in the Q&A section of the call today, so you're welcome to go ahead and type any questions you have into the Q&A section of your Zoom screen, and Cory and I will go ahead and start fielding them. So the first one we had was about school boards, and it's about can we do a round about school board elections? So that's a great question. We pay really close attention to school boards here at Ballotpedia. Cory and his team do a ton of really interesting research on that area. We are preparing to do a bigger release about our overall results from school board analysis in the coming weeks ahead. In the meantime, though, I'll put Cory on the spot a little bit too, and I'll drop this little screenshot in of our interim results so far from analyzing what we call our school board conflict race analysis. So let me go ahead and adjust my screen share to do that. And we can take a look at this here. So Cory, walk our listeners through our school board conflicts approach and the analysis we've been doing and what we found so far.
Yeah, if you get our daily brew, this will be in there tomorrow morning also. So if you don't subscribe, you can subscribe and yeah, have this all sent to you 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, whatever time it goes out. So on top of our regular election coverage, within our scope, we've been doing this project for over a year now, where we look specifically at races where one of 3 issues, school board races where one of 3 issues comes up: race and education, COVID responses, or sex and gender. These are kind of hot button political topics. We've seen and heard people talking about them coming up in school board elections and school board meetings and things like that. So we tracked, 561 school districts with elections for 1,800 seats total, holding elections on November 8th, where one of those topics came up. Well, one of the someone was making an issue of it, basically. So we had data on 1,263 of those winners, so small-ish sample of the 1,800 total winners. And what this spreadsheet is looking at, if someone is labeled as supporting on COVID responses, for example, this says that the winner, 14.2% of the winners we identified had supported COVID mitigation and responses in their school district, right? They had supported a school closure maybe, or mask requirement, vaccine requirements, and things like that. On the other hand, if somebody were opposed to those policies, they would be in the opposing bucket. Race and education, supporting, these are folks who are going to be supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, supporting increased use of a discussion of race in school curriculums. Same with sex and gender. So that's what the supporting bucket is. So these percentages show the percentage of our winners who fall into these buckets. It doesn't mean that 25.3%, or let's stick with COVID responses. It doesn't mean that 21.9% of people, of all candidates that won election in these school districts, were opposed to COVID responses. It just means that of our winners, 21.9% had expressed opposition to these policies. So you're seeing a very even split between the supporting and opposing buckets, even as this sample size increases. So 32.1% of all of these winners were in the supporting bucket, 31.1% were in the opposing bucket, and then 35.7% are unclear as we continue to process through. But it's that 30-30 split has been pretty consistent as we've been crunching the numbers.
Yep. Yeah. So we're excited to continue to march through this data. You can see about, in addition to the fact that we still have about a third of the races still to process, of the ones we've processed so far, about a third of them, 452, had unclear stances. So what we'll do is, we'll kind of circle back and see if we can, look again and see if we can actually find a way to label them. Although in many cases, it might not have been an issue one way or the other. So we're continue to publish this. Like Cory said, we'll have a little bit of a sneak peek in tomorrow's Daily Brew, and then when we come back from Thanksgiving, we'll have the final report will be released. So we're excited to keep digging into this, and school boards is not going to be an election issue that goes away. I was talking to some of our team members earlier today that in 2021 there were 50 unique weeks that had some kind of an election. So that'll happen again next year. There's always elections going on in the United States. Always a time for voters to go weigh in on an issue. So great question. Thank you for that. And we'll move to another one. So next question is about divided government. When you say there were 31 divided states in 1992 and 1997, do you mean the governor was from one party and the other controlled both chambers? Or does that figure include states in which legislative chambers were split between the parties as well? Cory, you want to fill that one?
Yeah, it could mean that the legislative chambers were split. So it just means that of the 3 trifecta elements, governor, state senate, state house, it's only a trifecta if all 3 match up. So you could have had a Democratic governor, a Democratic state senate, and a Republican state house, and that would be a divided government.
Great question. All right, then let's go ahead and go back to my presentation and hand it back to Lauren then.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And we apologize if we did not get to your question today. Please feel free to email any of your additional questions to editor@ballotpedia.org, and we're happy to answer you directly. Ballotpedia relies on donations for all that we do. So if you like our work and want to support us, please consider donating. You can do so by going to ballotpedia.org/donate. You can stay updated on what we're doing regularly by visiting our homepage, ballotpedia.org, where you'll find the latest political news and links to our major coverage areas and analyses. Another way to stay informed is through our newsletters. Cory mentioned earlier the Daily Brew, for example, which cover topics ranging from election policy to federal courts and lots more. Again, there's a link to that on our homepage for a full list of our newsletters. Of course, thank you to our speakers, Geoff and Cory, for this comprehensive coverage. And have a great day, everyone. And thank you so much for watching.
Thanks.